My name is Bob Caldwell. By way of quick background, I have been a long-time faculty member in the Department of Psychology and then spent 5 years as an associate dean in social science before I became ombudsperson. Actually, I became ombudsman 4 years ago, and within a week or two of becoming the ombudsman, I was in demand. I was demand and became the ombudsperson. So I have now been the ombudsperson for almost 4 years, January 1st. The sort of overall topic for today is avoiding student grievances. I think it is in all of our best interests. Those of you that have been involved in student grievances know, I guess appropriately for STEM people, it's a black hole. That is, energy goes in and nothing comes out. And your energy gets sucked into it, often to little or no avail. If we can resolve these issues, if we can avoid these issues, prevent these issues from going to a grievance, it is always preferable. So our structure for today, what we hope to do is I'm tasked with beginning by offering a little bit of perspective about what sorts of issues, what sorts of problems come to the ombudsperson's office, what I deal with day in and day out that involve conflicts with faculty, often avoidable conflicts with faculty. That will sort of set the stage. We are hoping that this is going to be a very interactive session where you can share your experiences and your perspectives and problems that you have either struggled with in the past or are struggling with at this moment. And so we would like you to be able to have some input into how the thing evolves and develops. So we're going to take a moment after this initial presentation and hand out 3x5 cards where you can put questions that you would like to see addressed, questions that you've always wondered about. This is your chance to say, I've always been unclear about X. Could you clear me up about X? There's a lot of misunderstandings and myths, both on the part of students and frankly on the part of some faculty about how things work and should work. So here's your chance. So you'll get a chance to write your questions. We'll collect them while Tom Wolf goes over some important policy and information that you should know. And then lastly, the three presenters led by Kathy Doig will have a panel discussion in which you can, your questions that you write on the 3x5 cards will be addressed, and also if new questions arise spontaneously, we're pretty flexible. So we hope that you participate in that way. By way also of background, I mean, I talked about my personal background, but the background of the University Ombudsperson's office is we're here really to help make sure that students are living up to their responsibilities and that their rights as students are both known and protected. The Ombuds Office was formed back in 1967. And if you can think about what the university was like in 1967 with a lot of demonstrations and building occupations and protests and all, someone really had to be very clear about what rights did students have, what rights don't students have, and someone sort of neutral third party to make sure that their rights were actually being protected and implemented. And that's the University Ombudsperson. So we help students who feel like they're being treated unfairly or that their rights have been violated We also help faculty avoid treating students unfairly, avoid violating their rights, and we welcome calls or visits from faculty or instructors to say, here's what's going on, I'm not sure what to do, or I have a variety of options that I'm considering. What would you suggest? And sometimes those calls really help because we can help steer you in a positive, productive, policy-consistent direction as opposed to some of your other options, which might be, in the long run, not only unproductive, but against university policy. And so please call. This quote comes from our website, and I really encourage you to go visit the Ombudsperson's website. If you have questions, it is a resource-rich website, and a lot of questions that faculty and students have are addressed and answered there in what I hope is a clear and user-friendly way. So, at the Ombuds office, we're busy. That is, students come to us and faculty come to us. This is a slide from our last year's annual report, and it shows that in the last academic year, we had 1,300 contacts from students and faculty, and even parents and alumni and staff. We'll listen to anyone. But a student has to be in the mix for us to be involved. So we get a lot of contacts. It was down a little bit from last year, which was over 1,500 contacts. The record, I think, was a year or two before this slide begins at 1,700 contacts. So it's pretty consistent and pretty busy. Students come to us with a variety of issues. We will deal with any conflict with any part of the university. So we get non-academic, in the strict sense of the word, non-academic complaints. My financial aid isn't, my housing doesn't work, even some that don't have much to do with the university. You know, I'm living off campus and I'm having a landlord conflict. That accounts for about 20% of our contacts. 80% are academic in nature, and it represents some sort of conflict students are having with their instructors in their classes. And here is the sort of coding system that we use to code those academic related, what we call instructional contexts. And you can see three relatively tall spikes there, and that's where I'm going to focus on. That's where the business is. One is grades and grading. That should probably be of no surprise, so we could talk about that in a minute. Academic dishonesty, cheating, plagiarism, that sort of thing, and complaints about the TA or the professor, the instructor. And we'll have examples of each one of those. So far, so good? Any questions? All right. Let's talk about the three tall spikes then. By far, as the slide says, academic dishonesty is what brings a lot of students into our office. Once they are accused of academic dishonesty, they want to know what their rights are. That seems reasonable. Some of them feel like they have been unjustly accused. Some of them feel like they didn't do what they were accused of, and how can they fight what they consider to be an unjust accusation. Sometimes they recognize that they were caught red-handed and they actually did do it, and they're not disputing the fact that they did it, but they're upset about the harshness of the penalty that comes their way. They say, yes, I did it, but it really seems like a minor thing of what I did, and yet the penalty seems very draconian. And sometimes it does seem, even to me, that the penalties are not sort of commensurate with the severity of the offense. But they come here to our office to see what's the next steps and how are they going to do this. Now, there are things that you can do, I would maintain, to make sure that the kinds of complaints about academic dishonesty, plagiarism, cheating on exams, unauthorized collaboration. This is, I think, an increasingly growing category of problems. This is where faculty assign group projects, and yet they have to also assign individual grades. And so somewhere along the line it goes from being a group project to being your own work, because we need to assess what your contribution to the project was and what the quality of your work is. And sometimes students miss that switch and begin to do things like hand in one paper from the whole group, or the same paper from every individual in the group, when you expected individual papers. And the part of it is students say, well, that wasn't clear. That I didn't understand that. It never said that in the syllabus, or we did this in another class and it was exactly what the professor wanted, and now we're in this class, we made the assumption that you're all operating under the same rules, and we're shocked to find out that you don't talk to one another. So there are certain things I think you can do in terms, and we'll talk about best practices later throughout the session, to make sure that your expectations are clear around issues of academic misconduct. Grades and grading are number two, unless you think academic misconduct is really about grades and grading too. I mean, I think ultimately it's probably all about grades and grading, to be truthful with you. But the university, in its Code of Teaching Responsibilities, says you have to be clear about how you're going to grade people. They have to know the basis upon which their grade is being determined. And you have that obligation. You can't just sort of keep that a secret. You can't keep it to yourself. You have to make a good faith effort to communicate that. Usually it means being pretty explicit in the syllabus. Students will frequently say, it wasn't clear in the syllabus, or it was clear and the faculty didn't follow what they said in the syllabus, yes, it was all clear and they did it, but they didn't add up my points right. Mistakes have been made, or even the professor says mistakes have been made, but he's not fixing it, and I'm still getting a lower grade than I need, and how can I get my grade changed? So all sorts of grade and grading issues, grades and grading disputes come in our direction, and again, there are things you could probably do on the syllabus and in your class to just be much more transparent in terms of how you're going to proceed. Students, frankly, are way more concerned about grades than learning, to be truthful. And so if you're not paying attention to the grade part of this, you're missing what they're watching. So you really have to go there. The last big spike for business at our office is complaints about the instructor, or sometimes the TA, but often the instructor. And students come in this category mostly angry, actually livid sometimes. at the treatment that they have received at the hands of their instructors. And you know, the mantra in our office, we have several mantras, but one of the mantras in our office that saves us a lot is there are two sides to every story. So when a student comes in livid, complaining about a faculty member, we always remind ourselves, we haven't heard the faculty member side of this story. Sometimes when we hear that side, the picture changes dramatically. But sometimes the stories that you hear, if true, and many of them are, say that some of your colleagues, probably no one in this room, but some of your colleagues are rude, disrespectful, dismissive, insensitive bores, and they just think students are somehow beneath contempt. And students, as paying customers for our services, just find that increasingly unacceptable. They feel like when they try to communicate with faculty should respond, and faculty sometimes the expectations for response time are unrealistic, and you have to help students understand that. But when faculty go weeks without answering urgent emails, when faculty have put on their syllabus, I will not respond to any email, ever. In fact, you get punished if you even send me one. You start thinking, wait a minute, that doesn't seem right. And in fact, it isn't. So in terms of, you know, being just civil and appropriate and responsive, students will really appreciate that beyond what you might imagine. And when you're not that way, or your colleagues are not that way, students will just somehow tear their hair out until they say, somebody's got to hear about this. Someone's got to understand that this is just unacceptable. And at its extremes, I say, it actually begins to violate students' legitimate rights for appropriate and civil treatment. Questions yet? Yes, sir.
So when you get a situation like that, you talk to the professor, I presume. You also talk to their supervisors.
Someone will talk to their professor and someone will talk to their supervisor. It is my belief and practice that the most appropriate person to talk to both the professor and the supervisor about that is the student who is most directly affected. This is, in my opinion, an opportunity, as many of these issues are, an opportunity for students to begin to learn their responsibilities as adults, for them to begin to take personal responsibility for solving, or at least trying to solve, their own problems. I sometimes feel that they come running to my office like, Daddy, he's been mean to me. And I always say, well, but stand up for yourself then. Here's how you do it. Here's who you talk to. Here's the sorts of things you should say. Here's some ammunition. But the first time, it's your job. It's not my job. And what you learn about yourself and about the system and about the people may be lessons that stick with you long beyond what you learn in their classroom. So yes, the faculty should be addressed, and the supervisor, the chair of the department, most likely should be brought into it if the faculty doesn't respond appropriately. But most of the time, I encourage the students to be the one to do that initial contact. If I have to do it, I can, but I always think that represents a bit of a failure somehow along the way, that people should respond appropriately to students. So, yes, sir.
So what happens in the instance where it's a student to a student issue, and not student to a TA, student to an instructor? Do they still come to your office? And, obviously they come to the instructor trying to resolve the issue, but sometimes they don't find a satisfactory answer.
Student-to-student problems are complicated in the sense that it sort of depends on what the nature of the problem is. If it's a student accusing another student of copying material or something, then I think the instructor has to be involved. If it's something non-academic, a student, we have all just gone through, or probably just gone through training on relationship violence and sexual misconduct. If the nature of the problem between students is that sort of thing, it goes. Anyone can come to see me, but I would send that to our OIE investigators. They're responsible for looking into that. I see the Ombuds Office often as a triage to say there are resources that are appropriately put in place to deal with this issue and to investigate it, and here's who they are and here's how to do it. Go for it. Yes?
With your data chart where you show the complaints, do you also record the name of the individual that the complaint is towards, so that if you have a particular instructor name that shows up more repeatedly, that information is shared with that faculty or instructor member's supervisor, so that there's some...
Yes. That's a delicate issue in that one of the cornerstones of our ombuds practice is confidentiality. And people should feel like they can come to us and what they share with us stays with us. That makes it possible for people to come to us. So we have to be very careful about that. But having said that, I have at least a virtual, not even virtual, a metaphorical wall of shame, is what I call. These are people who show up in my complaint file frequently as having, there are faculty among us who just sort of go through life creating distress in their wake. And they do so almost joyfully, it seems. And when I recognize one of those people, I will often go and talk to their chair and say, look, I'm not telling who, I'm not telling why, but I have gotten multiple reports from students, all of whom are sort of saying pretty much the same thing, all of which are just outrageous behavior on the part of your faculty. You've got a problem. You've got a problem, and you, chair, need to deal with it somehow. And chairs tend to be mixed. They're grateful and angry both to hear that kind of news. So, but what happens is, in some of those cases, those people are no longer teaching undergraduates or teaching under much tighter supervision, or teaching much smaller sections, or something. Things have happened.
Do you have a feeling what the level of academic dishonesty is in our community?
Unacceptably high.
Is it increasing?
Is the level increasing? It's hard to know, in the sense that I think it is true that reports seem to be inching up, but I'm not naive enough to think that all instances are reported. So I don't know that the increase in reports suggests an increase in the problem or increase in the willingness of faculty to address the problem in a formal way. I think in general, not to be flip, but one case would be too many. And we really do need to work in a proactive, positive ways to establish a culture of academic honesty, academic integrity, rather than simply being reactive when we discover academic misconduct. And I think there are plans afoot, activities in progress that you will probably see in the next 12 months that really begin again. It's not like no one's tried to do this before, but begin again to stimulate a community-wide discussion about the importance of integrity. I'm mindful of time, and I know we're going to have more opportunity for questions that the whole panel will get to. Kathy will hand out 5 by 7, 3 by 5, I guess 3 by 5 cards. If you have a question, not just on the things that I talked about, but on any of the things that you might think about student grievances, please write it down. We'll give you about 5 minutes. So it's 4 minutes past the hour by the clock on the back wall there. So 9 minutes past, we'll jump up and collect them and sort through them.
Good afternoon. My name is Tom Wolf. I joined the Faculty of Civil and Environmental Engineering just short of 30 years ago. It'll be 30 years in January, following a 15-year career as a civil engineer, specifically geotechnical engineer, which means I work with the mechanics of soils and rocks and foundations and earth embankments and so forth. About 17 plus years ago in 1998, our assistant dean for undergraduate studies stepped up to be acting dean for a year prior to retirement when we had a change in deans, and I was asked to assume the role of undergraduate associate dean for a 2-year period from 1998 to 2000. That lasted 17 years. So I've been associate dean for 17 years. With a fair amount of notice this year, I filed my retirement papers and started a consultantship year, which would have me retired in August of 2016. I was looking for a quiet, project-oriented, teaching-oriented, cushy consultantship year. And my own department chairman, Dr. Neeraj Butch, wave your hand, succeeded me as associate dean, leaving a need for an interim department chair while we did a new search. So I have found myself now as a department chair, having been an associate dean and department chair, and I've been an acting director of this and that off and on. So I've seen a lot of stuff, I suppose. So I'm going to talk about things that you may run into. There are many, many policies and obviously practices at Michigan State. I don't know how you'd ever learn all of them, but I'm going to touch the ones that you as faculty in the classroom, and particularly newer faculty, may run into fairly quickly. Let's see. Okay. First of all, where do you find out all this information? There's a Code of Teaching Responsibility, which if you haven't seen it yet, you need to read it. Faculty have a lot of leeway in what they can do and can't do, very different than many other types of employment. But the Code of Teaching Responsibility, if you violate it, is the one place where the university can actually come after you and do adverse things. You are bound by your employment to follow this. So these are things you have to do. There's another document called Integrity of Scholarship and Grades, which largely relates to academic dishonesty. There's a document called Student Rights and Responsibilities. This was originally called the Academic Freedom Report, and if I'm not mistaken, the creation of the Ombudsman's Office and this report came out of the first version of this report, I suppose. This has to do more with process and civility, and there's at least one line in there I'll call your attention to that says faculty and students have an expectation of mutual civility. And very occasionally I've had a student write something on an exam like the F word or something very demeaning, thinking they could get away with that. And I've pointed the student back toward this mutual civility clause that basically says if you could complain if the faculty said that, the faculty could complain if you said that and could bring you up on charges of not being mutually civil. And I suggest you apologize to the faculty before they in fact do that. And they've actually had 2 students ask me to help write them the apology. Academic programs is the university catalog, which has all of the governing rules that relate to academics. And all of these, while they're scattered around, are all on the Ombudsperson's website. So if you go there and look on the left side, the university policies and publications, you will find all of these and a few more. So I'm going to touch on the ones that come around. Bob has talked about a few of these. Students should know your office hours. Very important one, a very useful one, I would say, is to inform students if you're not going to make office hours. I, for the last few years, have taught a fairly large second-year class, and my office hours are pretty lonesome. I actually get a lot done during office hours. But whenever I'm going to be out of town or away at a meeting, I send a note out to the students and say, I won't be available for office hours this particular date. If you need to see me, you can make an appointment with my secretary. And come the end of the year, when we do my CERS forms and they'll ask, was I available for office hours? The students will say, well, I never went, but I know that he was because he always would inform us when he wasn't. So, you know, it worked pretty good. Bob has also touched on this. You need to be clear on when and how you will answer email. Apparently there's some flexibility. It's tightened up. The Code of Teaching Responsibility now specifically addresses that. It says we encourage you to do email. Two things that I do is I ask them to put the course number in the subject line. As an administrator, I get a lot of email, and that throws it into a particular mailbox so that I can always make sure I look at that mailbox once a day or before class, rather than it getting buried somewhere. If you write me and the title is class instead of CE 312, I may not get to it for a while. Also, we'll have students that will email you and then email you an hour later and said, how come you didn't answer my email? I'll tell students, at least in class, reasonable expectation is I'll try to answer these within 24 hours, but I do a whole lot of other things during the day, and so do you, besides sitting here looking to see, did I get an email? And answer your email. One thing that will both save you some time and promote fairness is if I get an email from a student that's a relevant question that perhaps should have been answered in class, I'll take the name off and email the entire class and say, a student asked this question and here's the answer. And if I then get another email from another student further down in the queue, I probably won't answer that, or I'll send just a one-liner that says, see the class list. So students need to know your rules, procedures, and expectations here. Oh, how do we get so? This thing's touchy. Okay. Dates. Exam dates should be clear. Students, particularly final exams, and we'll get to final exams, but if you're going to have a midterm, if you can't put the precise date, you should be able to say the week it's going to be, and you should give any announcement of changes. It is not unusual for me to schedule a midterm exam and decide that maybe we're going to need to slip it one class period or so because we haven't quite covered what we wanted to do, but you need to get that information out. I don't think syllabus says you have to be precise, but you have to sort of meet the spirit of what you have communicated. A big issue, well, maybe it's not big in numbers, but it's a tough issue when it comes up, is the student, particularly an out-of-state or out-of-country student, comes to you and says, gee, I saw the final exam was Thursday, but I bought tickets to go home on Tuesday because I could save a lot of money. You're going to give me a makeup, aren't you? Don't have to. But the best way to avoid this is be proactive and be certain and check that your final exam date and time, which changes from semester to semester, is in your syllabus, and take note of it and remind students early on. We have a situation in engineering right now with a very large class with multiple sections that's moving toward a common final exam that's being arranged by the registrar. But we're doing that here in the first couple of weeks of class so that we'll have the next 10 weeks or more to be sure everybody knows what that situation will be.
Tom, can I offer just an example of incredible prior action on this? In my department, we have a course where it's kind of divided into two halves, and the final exam for the first half of the course will occur on the Friday right before spring break every year. And if you go and you look that course up in the schedule, you know how you get to put little information in there about stuff? After this problem a number of times, that is indicated in there. Don't plan on leaving early for spring break. I mean, that's what it communicates to the students, because you're going to have an exam that day.
While we're on dates and spring break, personal observation, Wednesday before Thanksgiving is very problematical. On the one hand, this university has chosen to remain open. On the other hand, it is the busiest travel day in the entire year, and we have increasing numbers of out-of-state students whom you're putting in the situation of either not getting to class or not getting home for Thanksgiving. The university has discussed options on this a number of times, but if they close on Wednesday, sort of the whole week is shot. Some of our students have younger brothers and sisters where they have the entire week off, and it's simply a problem. It's up to you what to do. What do? I teach, including perhaps new material, but I don't give a quiz or anything else, and you're responsible. Okay, come on. Do this one. Yes.
So are office hours required?
Yes.
Some faculty would say that students never show up, and so I put on my syllabus that you can make an appointment with me at any time, but I'm not holding regular office hours.
I'm curious to hear what Bob says, but as I read it, you're required to hold a reasonable number of office hours. Reasonable is probably a key word. If no one ever shows up, that's a good deal. Schedule office hours, and you know you've got time where you can get your next proposal written or whatever. But I think I think, and we'll wait to see, if this came to a complaint or a hearing, if the faculty were reasonable in accommodating students' requests to meet, it probably would go in the faculty's favor.
The university recognizes that faculty should be available to students outside of the class hours. That in the past always put a high premium on regular office hours. Departments sometimes have even more specific recommendations about office hours that supersede or are more prescriptive than the university. So you should check with your department too to make sure that your department doesn't have a rule about you must have 2 regularly scheduled office hours a week. Some departments do. Having said that, I think regular availability outside of the class, I don't think requires that it must be a certain hour. I think if you say, I am available to you, here's how you access me, and if that's call and make an appointment, then I'll meet with you. If that works, I would go with Tom, that's not going to be a problem. That may go against your particular department's rules about that, but not the university's spirit.
I think if you have a large class size, setting a single hour or 2 hours during the week doesn't get there every, so you have to open it up
Rich? So how does an online class differ? You have some students who are not around, you have obviously some students that are around. Does that mean that, it seems kind of funny to have an online class and then say, yeah, I'll be in my office at these times, even though you guys are halfway around the world.
I would ask my friend Rich Enbody, who teaches a very large online class, but I would expect that there are some online office hours that are also posted in both Eastern Time and Greenwich Mean Time or Universal Time. Is that right?
There weren't, no.
Really? So you just handle it by email?
You know, we have discussion forums and all sorts of other, we have a variety of methods, but I guess I'm breaking the law here.
Perhaps. One more question, then we'll continue. Yes.
Can graduate TAs handle the office hours, or does the faculty member have to have them?
Both, in my view. The question is, can graduate TAs? What we do, we got one class in engineering. Actually, we got one that's 1,400, and we have one that's about 800 a year. Split that across 2 semesters. Both the instructor and the TAs hold office hours, and they're kind of scattered around throughout the day. So if you want to see the instructor, it might be at a certain time. If you can come at another time, you may see the teaching assistant. But yes, it's a big operation in a large class. Semester dates, there's 2 important ones. The refund date, which occurs about the 4th week of class, is the time which you can drop the class and get a full refund. As Dr. Doig mentioned, there are certain classes that don't run on the standard schedule. You can always click on the section number on the schedule of courses and find out what those appropriate dates are. So as a student in your, one kind of thing that I wish the university would do is you don't get any notice if a student drops your class. And so the only thing you can do is rerun your class list and try to figure out if that person has actually left you. Mid-semester is the last date that a student can drop with no grade reported. There is no requirement, but the students will appreciate you greatly if you can return something before both of those dates, and particularly the second one. If, as an associate dean or assistant dean, we see students will show up the next day or the day after and say the instructor gave an exam on the drop date and we got it back 2 days later and I want to drop because I'm failing. Can't do it. If a student drops after I'm going to come back to this one here because that's a dean's drop or an associate dean's drop. We'll come back to that. You need to retain exam materials for 1 semester. Students have a right to review. Students own the answers but not the questions, which is puzzling to many of us because if you got the answer, you probably could figure out the questions. Okay, it wants to do something. We'll try 4 hours. Okay. Interestingly, students have 30 days to appeal a grade, but you need to hold the materials for a semester. Does that sound right?
No, they actually have until midway through the following semester.
Mid-semester, the final semester, okay. But you still have to hold the materials for the entire semester. So they have a right to own them, even if it's too late to appeal.
Tom, that's just the final exam, isn't it?
That's final. Well, that brings up an interesting point. The other work of the students should be returned prior to the final. And I've actually run into a couple of new faculty who had attended universities outside the U.S. That were not aware or certain that they needed to return graded material, that they only needed to inform students of their grade. So students own their work, and if you want to split hairs, they own answers but not the questions. But at least in most STEM classes, when you return the answers, the questions come along with them, and there really are no new questions in the world in most of these courses. So here's the drop after midterm. Week after midterm, student is diagnosed with cancer. Student is hit by the bus. Student is called to military service. Whatever. Student is unable to complete the semester. Or perhaps wants to drop a course because for some reason specific to that course, they want to drop that course but not some others. And it will, often the students will want to do this to protect their grade. The system is designed not to protect the student's grade. The system is designed to fairly get the student out of the class with appropriate grades or marks on the transcript depending on how the student was doing up to that point. So Kathy gets hit by the bus. Kathy's an engineering student. She's in Sparrow Hospital in Traction. She'll be here for a couple of weeks. She's taken 4 courses in civil engineering. She goes to Dr. Idema or calls from the hospital perhaps and says, I need to drop my classes. The assistant dean goes to the faculty. She is passing 2 of her 4 courses and failing 2 of her 4 courses prior to the bus incident.
Maybe this was lucky.
She gets a W for the courses that she was passing. Shows on the transcript that she went through without prejudice. She gets a 0 for the courses that she was failing, even though she can't complete because she was not failing, or she was failing at that particular time. So it cannot protect a failing grade. When we inform students of this, a number of requests to drop just sort of disappear, and we remind them that within the university repeat policy, they may be able to repeat this course and the 2nd grade will replace their first one. Okay. So you as the instructor might be asked, was the student passing, in which case they get a W? Were they failing, which I mentioned? But you also have an option called no basis for grade, which is non-prejudicial, gives you a W. An example might be that the final or the last project is heavily weighted and they haven't done it yet, so you have no basis for grade. Your interpretation is up to you. If you want to assist a student under a circumstance that you may not know the particulars, the assistant or associate dean is the only one that has to hear the circumstance, you can say no basis for grade. Is there a question on that? Okay. But can't protect you against failing. I'm failing, I need to drop the class. Sorry, you had 8 weeks. Yes?
If you do assign a W, do they have a certain amount of time to?
No, you're out. You're out of the pool. If it's a required course, you'll need to repeat it to graduate. If it's not a required course, you may repeat it, and if you got a 0, you may wish to repeat it, because while both grades, the 0 and the 2nd grade, will show on the transcript, the GPA counts the last attempt. There's an interesting side note here. I got a 1 or 1.5 in calculus, which is passing, but I want to do better, so I repeat the course. And because I've already attended the course, I don't really need to attend again. I only need to show up and take the exams. And near the middle of the semester, I think I'm just going to stick with the 1.5. I'm going to quit going. And I get a 0. The 0 replaces the 1.5. The last grade governs, you're in for the 3rd try. Okay, essentially you're giving up your 1st grade in exchange for the right to take the 2nd course. And we have graduating seniors from time to time that learn that the hard way. A couple items on finals. Your class is required to meet for a 2-hour period during final week. That time will vary each semester. If you teach a course at the same time every semester, you're going to have a Monday exam one time, you're going to have a Thursday exam another time, you might draw the Friday at 11 in the morning exam, but you won't do it often because it rotates around. Not only the students need to be there, you need to be there. And you need to somehow grade the material. So someone comes to me and says, well, I got my exam on Friday, instructor, and I've only got till Tuesday to grade it, and my partner or my colleague here has had an exam on Monday and he's got till Tuesday to grade it. That's not fair. I only got the weekend to grade it and I'm going to Switzerland. Make an exam that's easy to grade if you've got Friday thing. If you got a Monday class, make an exam that's easy to grade. Okay. There's no requirement that you give a final. You can do other things during this 2-hour period. But if you do give a final, it has to be scheduled during final week. So we have students come in, Dr. So-and-so said we're going to have a final the last week of class so that we don't have to do anything during final week. Is it a final? Or is it the 3rd exam? And again, if this were appealed, we'll use the duck rule. If it quacks like a duck and walks like a duck and has feathers and so forth, it's probably a duck. So I tell students and faculty, if the exam is substantially comprehensive, covers everything in the course, is kind of long and so forth and so on, if it looks like a final and it's held before that, 1, you can't do it, and if it were appealed, we would bring in a panel or a hearing board of students and faculty, and they'd say, this looks like a final. If it really covers material in the last part of the semester and is the same length as the other ones, could make a case that this is not a final. Okay. Yes?
So I'm not getting this first point here. Classes are required to meet?
Yes.
If I'm not giving a final?
Yes. That's in all the university regulations. Now,
So I've got a class of 450, we're going to meet and do nothing?
if you read the regulations, you can meet and return work, discuss the class, and so forth and so on. You don't have to edit this out, but I know of many faculty that will say, okay, we're done with everything for the semester. We're required to meet. If anyone wishes, you may meet me in my office at the appointed time. I know that happens. Or faculty can report to the room and chat with anyone who has to chat. So we know that people don't observe this, but that is the requirement. Can be used for final project. I know of classes where it's used for project presentations rather than a final. Yes?
Assuming, for like final exams, maybe a lecturer or a faculty member wouldn't go and proctor this, maybe a TA would. So could a TA then pull off the same trick essentially?
Substitute for you in those last 2 hours?
In terms of substituting, if the TA is fully qualified to, oh, you mean if we're not actually doing anything in it? Don't know. You're getting here on shaky ground.
But Tom,
Yeah.
let me pose this question. The topic of this whole thing is avoiding student grievances. Do you think a student is going to grieve that you didn't hold your 2-hour meeting during holiday?
Probably not.
Maybe they failed in the previous week. They want to do it again.
That's makeup. That's a different issue. We'll talk about that in a minute. Yeah.
I have 2 questions. If you give a final,
Yes.
can a teaching assistant or other qualified person proctor that exam if you're not available?
Yes. In my view, yes, as long as they're qualified. The question is, can a TA proctor the exam if you're not available? Yes, as long as they're qualified. Another faculty could proctor it. My mother-in-law passes away during final week. I have to leave town and go to a funeral. Someone can proctor my exam.
My second question, I'm a bit confused about the 4th and 6th point. 4th says there's no requirement for a final. So why the question about whether the exam is a final or not? Why?
Because a professor comes along and says, we're going to have the final exam the last week of class instead of during final week. Not required to give a final, but if he or she says it's a final, or it has all the earmarks of a final, we're going to schedule 2 hours in the evening and it's going to cover everything we've done all semester, but it's not a final. One could make the case, this is a final. Looks like a final, smells like a final, you got to do it during final week. Yes?
So I think you would respond to this, but I want to just clarify. So you're saying that the finals week 2-hour period meeting can be basically administered as like an office hour?
Can be used for anything. It's an official class meeting at a non-standard time. Can be used for, I think actually academic programs, or one of the regulations say you can discuss matters relative to the class, discuss performances, hear what you would like to improve the next time. But it's a regular class meeting, but it's at an alternate time. One more, because I want to be sure we get to
I would just comment that when they have the general chemistry and these big exams,
Sure.
they look for classrooms. So I get asked, because they know I have a 1-credit seminar course, if I'm going to be using that classroom during final exam week, because they want my classroom. So I do that, because I don't use it, so I say, I am available in my office during the 2-hour final exam week, because if all of us tied up our classrooms, the university would be in big trouble with these accounting and chemistry and ethics.
There's rules and that's why I call this policies and practices. We also have a class in engineering that meets only on Friday, and it has like 700 students in it. And that means it lands right on top of the Monday, Wednesday, Friday thing. So there's people in a Monday, Wednesday class meet in the same room, and we go looking all over campus to do that final. This one comes up a lot. The 3 exam rule. I actually had a student in engineering a year and a half ago that had 5 exams in one day, and we actually proved it. We triple checked it, and he really did. And we had a department, as did Kathy, that where a large number of students had 3 or 4 exams in the same day. Students cannot be required to take more than 2 exams in a calendar day. If they're scheduled more, they can take 3 if they want. You can run into students who have 4 exams in 24 hours. Doesn't matter. You could have 2 in the afternoon, 2 the next morning. The issue is calendar day. If one of the exams is a common final, common finals are given by the math department, physics department, probably economics, chemistry, large classes where you want to get everybody at the same time. The common final has to accommodate the student. So if you're teaching a 300 level class, that's one section and someone has this issue, the first thing to say is, do you have a common final? Go see them. Otherwise, one of those affected faculty is going to have to provide a makeup. The associate dean can verify and direct a makeup. Now this reads a little fuzzy. The practice in engineering for more than 20 years before my time is if the student has not gotten a professor to volunteer, student comes to the associate dean, and the associate dean says, all of your exams are equally important, which one would you like to move? And the student identifies the one they'd like to move, and the associate dean directs that faculty to make a makeup exam and accommodate the student. I've had faculty tell me that that's hard for them to do because they have a large class. It's hard for them to do because they have a small class and everything in between. But you're down to the point where the most fair argument would be simply ask the student. Okay. Now, once the student says they want to move this, the instructor owns the makeup time. The instructor could say, 8 o'clock Monday morning, be ready. Okay.
One quick question.
Yes.
Has everything you said, has everything you said applied to both lecture and laboratory courses?
I'm going to go to Kathy on that one because in our courses, the lab is...
Or about...
Yeah, I see a lot of, the 3 exam rules is one that comes up.
The lab in most engineering courses is sort of connected in the exams and the lecture. If you have a lab-only course, I expect what you're bringing up is you got to set something up. Okay, that could be a consideration, I would suppose.
I think it still comes down to the fact that a student should not be expected to take more than 2 exams in one day. So, however that might fall out, if you are teaching a lecture lab course, you are going to give a final exam in both parts of the class, they probably would not fall on the same day. Oh, yes, they would. At the same time. You know what? I don't know. Because when you look at the final exam schedule, it's going by the lecture, right?
If it were a lab-only course that involves some sort of setup and the student had 2 other lecture courses, I think it would be reasonable to ask the student to pick between the lecture courses because other people are involved beyond just an instructor changing the exam.
You have 2 other questions.
Yes.
So with the makeup, so has there ever been a case where you've given someone a makeup exam early,
Yes.
okay, and then there's been an instance where the faculty have then assumed that makeup has resulted in a widespread cheating?
Okay.
My opinion on makeups is going to differ from many people in the university. Whether it's sooner or later, there's opportunities for students to know. It's more widespread if you do the makeup first. At least in STEM courses or engineering courses where a lot of things are calculated based. In some cases, I have given makeups the next day and not changed anything, and the distribution is still the same. I got people that ace it and I got people that fail it. What I and others often do is change some numbers, turn the problem around, since whatever was given becomes fine, and so forth. In terms of finding out what's on the exam, in my view, students should know what's on the exam. If you're giving a course in concrete materials, you're going to have to know something about the water-cement ratio. It's going to be on there. If you're giving a course in statics, there's going to be equation about three equations of statics. There's probably going to be a problem on a three-hinged arch. There's probably going to be find a reaction on a cantilever beam. There's no new problems in the world. The question is, do the students have the concepts? So I've had pretty good luck either changing a few numbers, sometimes doing nothing, but changing a few numbers, pull an exam from 4 years back and give that to the student that substantively is the same stuff but a different pool of questions. If you are guarding your questions because they're secret and you don't want someone to find out what the questions are, personally I don't get it, because I think if whatever you're teaching, you know what the questions are. They're whatever the concepts you've been teaching in the course, and they're the same questions that have gone around your field for 100 years. There may be other experiences in that. A question back there.
I'm wondering, does this apply also to midterm exams, or is this strictly, does this apply also to midterm exams, or the 3-exam rule, or is this specific to finals?
I'm going to get to other absences here, but this only applies to finals. Student could have 5 midterm exams on the same day, and when they do, if you're lucky, you'll hear about it about 2 weeks ahead of time.
So I had one situation in a big lecture course where I would have made an exam a couple of days before, and since I was going to do it, I gave the chance to anyone who wanted to. And then what happened is that some people that actually failed in the makeup wanted to come to the official final.
I came for practice.
Yeah. So what happens in that case? Are you supposed to allow that person to do the exam twice?
No. You need to be clear on that, but I've seen academic dishonesty filings where someone worked out, and there were 32 people in the room and they got 31 exams, and the person came in for practice and then came in and took the exam. And it's academic dishonesty. I want to pick up some time here because we want to get to the other questions. Grading. Grades of 0, 1, 1, 5 are repeatable up to 20. 2s and 2 5s are not repeatable. And this creates almost an ethical dilemma in the university, because limited enrollment programs, engineering, business, education, packaging, increasing, and others may have GPAs of 3 or higher for admission. So a 2.0 can be worse than a 1.5. 2.0, 2.5 is not repeatable, it'll hold your GPA down. 1 or 1.5 or 0, you can repeat the course. And what this turns into is students who have more time and money and understand the system have an advantage in that I'm going to not get a 2 or 2.5. I will write my name on the exam and turn it in blank to be sure that I get a low grade for the course so I can repeat. And another student comes out of a righteous family who calls home and says, I'm not doing very good, and they say, hang in there, you can do it, do your best, and they get a 2. And the students with more time or money are in fact rewarded, and the person that tried to do the right thing disadvantaged. This is tricky. There's no right answer. I know that you and some of us will have students that get a 2 and ask for a 1 or 1.5. They're asking you to change your evaluation. I'll leave that on your conscience. My best advice, and this comes out in advising, is if you know you're headed this way, if the student does what they need to do to get a repeatable grade, then the decision's on the students. There's no good answers to this one, but you're going to run into it if you're new faculty teaching first, second year courses. I don't know if anybody's got a better answer than that, but you need to be aware of it. What appears to be the right thing to do turns into an odd combination of circumstances. Yes?
So I know going through faculty governance, there's an attempt to potentially change this policy. Do you know where that sits?
I sat in one of those discussions like 2 or 3 years ago, and the last I've heard it's dormant, maybe it's back again, that would let you repeat any grade with another set of rules. And the one argument which I would favor, I wouldn't favor more than a second repeat except under very unusual circumstances. The issue that I understand is that there are certain classes in the university, such as accounting and perhaps calculus, where we'd never have enough seats. And then you're backing everyone up. So again, there's practical issues that are bumping against the good intentions of what I think would be a better policy. Persons with disabilities, I'm not going to go over this one in detail. It's very important though. If you have a student come to you with a form called a visa that says they get more time on tests or a private place to take a test, or they may miss a class on short notice due to an illness, you're obligated by federal law to provide the accommodations the RCPD states. And I've had some faculty question, well, this person obviously couldn't work in an engineering environment if it takes them twice as long to do certain work as others. And the answer is your rights to an education are broader than your rights to employment. The fact that the student may or may not get hired after they graduate based on that disability and what's a reasonable accommodation in the workplace can be different and more lenient in the university. You may run into a case where you think that the accommodation is not reasonable, and I would encourage you to talk to the people at RCPD because they do work very well with both faculty and students to work these things out. Yes?
I'm a new instructor, and I recently just received 4 visas from students, and 3 of them said that they needed note-taking help.
Yes.
And I contacted the RCPD people and asked them exactly what that meant and if what I was doing was enough, and they were very vague. So I'm very concerned. One of my questions on the 3x5 card is, am I going to get a grievance from these students? Because I don't want to provide them like word for word written notes of my lectures. I feel like I'm spoon feeding them.
So if they get note-taking advice, here's where the dilemma is over there. Students entitled to a note-taker. I once had a hearing impaired student that had a court reporter come into my class and take down everything I did. But they don't have sufficient resources to hire and pay for the note-taker. No, that's fine, but they don't have the resources to pay a note-taker to sit in with the person. And what I've seen them do is ask the instructor to send a note to the students and say, we have some people in the class that are in need of a note-taker. If you are willing to do this, volunteer or paid or whatever, see me and I'll help you make the connection. I've done that at least once successfully. It can be someone in the class, or in the case of the RCPD visa form, it could be a third party. But I'm not hearing that you have to provide that you have to write out all of your own notes when other people are doing that. But there should, yes.
I've had those instances a few times where the student has come with a recorder. I just wear it around my neck.
Yes.
And it gets recorded, and I hand it over to the student at the end of it. They had to take permission to do that, but that's fine.
And I'm fine with that, but I'm very uncomfortable asking other students to hand over their notes to somebody else. I just don't see how that's very useful for the person with a disability, because that student that's taking notes might not be what they want.
So you may suggest if they can, if you can record your lectures and hand it over to the student.
Right. Well, and along those same lines, you might talk with the RCPD about an option that I had with a student who was hearing impaired, but it might accomplish the same thing. And that was that they were using voice recognition just to convert my lecture into something printed. And the problem, of course, is if the language is too technical, it doesn't work so well, but that might be another option.
think we got two more, so we can get to the other questions here. There's a new grief absence policy, which was just sent out around. I'm not terribly familiar with it. It's long needed, but appears a little bit complicated. So the one point I want to make is, or a couple points. I assume students are telling the truth until I have reason to believe otherwise. And chronic violators you'll pick up pretty quick. We tell jokes about somebody had or a common one is we had 5 grandparents die in one semester. Some of our students have 8 grandparents. Parents have been divorced and remarried, and everybody's friendly with everybody else. By pure mathematics, based on the student's age, many or most of our students will lose at least one grandparent while they're in school. I had the personal situation of a son in school and my wife having returned for a bachelor's degree at the same time when she was in her 50s, and my wife lost her mother and father 6 weeks apart, with the latter one during final week. And she had difficulty with an instructor that did not believe that she could have lost her mother and father 6 or 8 weeks apart. And it was fairly ugly. My son did okay, but I hate to think it might have been because I was an administrator in the college and everybody probably knew it was okay. The grief absence policy is at least gives us a framework to work on that. And in other absences, somebody asked about makeup exams here. I've had faculty tell students that they would not provide a makeup for a senior going on a job interview. I think you need to keep in mind that's the main reason that our students are here, and be reasonable. I had a faculty one time say he would give the student a makeup exam if they missed for the job interview or a university-sanctioned event such as athletics, but it would be harder. So you can make a decision to skip your job interview and come here, or take the exam week and next week, and it'd be harder. Never could find this in the rules, but I told him the expectation was that the exam needs to be substantially equivalent. You can't tell them it would be harder. It could be different, but being harder is essentially penalizing someone. I think we're going to leave it there. You have Dr. Doig is going to do loose ends and questions.
Geez, I just got this last question. I'm going to take this as the first one. By way of introduction, since you have not met me, Kathy Doig, I'm in the Biomedical Laboratory Diagnostics program. I've been faculty at Michigan State for quite a while, and did a stint in our dean's office as associate dean for a portion of that, and I was program director as well as an administrator in the College of Human Medicine. So I've seen my share of these sort of circumstances too. This first one I'm going to do really quickly. My syllabus covers all kinds of information concerning academic dishonesty. Congratulations to you for having that in there. But it's now 5 pages long. How can I make it shorter? And I don't know if anybody will have a better answer, but I don't think you can. And I am the queen of the long syllabus. I've come to call it the handbook. It's, I think the last one turned out to be, honest to God, 28 pages long. And I actually make fun about it on the first day of class. Second question, and part of that is because there are 2 pages devoted to academic honesty and those sorts of circumstances, as well as a bunch of other tips on getting a good grade and stuff like that. How can I get my students to read it? I gave them a quiz on it.
Let me add to that. Doesn't make the total shorter, but I separate my syllabus and class schedule because sometimes I need to adjust the class schedule halfway through. So the syllabus is shorter, but the total amount of electronic pages or bits is not any shorter.
I'm going to hand this one to Bob. May I move a student during an exam if I think they are cheating?
Yes, you have the responsibility to appropriately proctor your exam. That changes depending on the circumstances of your exam. It changes from whether it's in person or online or any number of things. But you as the faculty, as the instructor, have the responsibility to make sure that your exam is given with some sense of integrity. And so if you have to do something to protect the integrity of your exam, including moving a student that you think might be peeking at a particular neighbor's paper, you can. But you should do it sort of politely, unobtrusively, not making a big, you cheater, move, kind of deal, so as not to embarrass the student, not to get them so upset that they don't do their best on the remainder of the exam. Please use some discretion. And oftentimes, if you move a couple of people, at least it takes some of the embarrassment and onus off of. If you just take one person and pluck them out and move them, it's much more obvious about what's going on than if you ask a couple of people to say, now that we've gotten some extra room because people have finished or left, could you please slide down a seat or two to put more room between you and a neighbor? Something of that sort. But yes, you have the responsibility to protect the integrity of the assessment process.
And just one other option to that I have used successfully. If I see a student whose eyes are wandering, I'll hand them a note that tells them that. Things like, please keep your eyes on your own paper. Just that simple. I have had students indignantly tell me they weren't cheating, and I said, I'm happy. And I've also had students walk out and not want to make eye contact with me, and I've had a student come and thank me for reminding her about protecting her own integrity. That was cool.
I used to tell students, if you have a moment in the class where you need to take a break from looking at your paper, look at the ceiling, because I've secreted at least one answer up there. So search the ceiling.
Tom, this one's for you. When a parent contacts me about how their student was treated unfairly, how much do I need to share with the parent what's appropriate or allowed?
Okay, under FERPA, Federal Education Rights and Policy Act, you cannot share any academic information with a third party, parent, spouse, or otherwise, without the express consent of the student. You can get that in writing. If sometimes as associate dean, the parent is there, we'll simply ask the student. Sometimes we'll ask the student to sign a release depending on the circumstances. What I've generally done is not share anything, but rather ask the parent, tell me what you have heard and what you want to share, and I can tell you how that fits regarding policy and what your student can do about that and how they can appeal it and so forth and so on. So I get a parent that says, I think my son is failing. And I say, well, I can't tell you. And she says, well, I'm looking at the report card. And I said, okay, tell me what you see. And so your son got a 0. Here's what your son can do. He can repeat the class in second grade, replace the first. Here's the procedure. My son was treated unfairly by an instructor, and I'd come back. If your son was treated as you say, here is who you go to, here is the process. So basically, the parent has the lead on the conversation. You really can't disclose anything about the students, but you can disclose everything about policies related to situations. I don't know if we answered the question or if somebody has another little specific in that. Okay.
Could I add to that? FERPA really does tie your hands in many ways, but nothing will drive a parent up the wall faster than you saying, FERPA, I can't talk to you. So I really encourage you to listen to what Tom said. Talk to the parents as much as you can. Answer their questions as much as you can without violating their students' right to confidentiality and privacy. But parents when they feel like you're stonewalling them, will just get more and more frustrated, and this will escalate into uglier and uglier things. Whereas if you just treated them sort of as best you can with as much as you can offer within the confines of FERPA, I think you're going to nip these things in the bud at a much better moment than if you let it get blown up. Yeah.
So most contact, I think, is going to be at least initial contact by the phone, and there's no way of identification via that route. So at some level, you have to say, you know, I really don't know really who you are.
I guess that frequently doesn't matter. That is, if they say, I'm his mother, then you say, okay, I'll talk to you as his mother.
But, you know, there's a level of, and so maybe it doesn't matter in the sense that you can't give out particular data anyway.
Right, you can't, you deal with the real mom exactly in the way you deal with a fake mom. But frankly, I've never had a fake mom.
It just makes me think of the day that I was talking with a mother using Tom's and Bob's recommendations, and when she said to me, so when I was an angel looking around, that's exactly how I felt. I tried to avoid letting my gasp be audible. But just bear in mind, they give their parents access to the learning system. So actually, one of the things that contributed to the length of my academic dishonesty list says giving access to the learning system to anyone, including your parents, is academic dishonesty in my class.
There was a question here.
Oh, sorry. So we've got several questions that are asking about this general thing. What happens to students once one of the academic dishonesty reports has been registered? And there's sort of interest in the consequences in several ways. How long does that information live? What are the consequences of it? Particularly international students have concerns about this. Will it affect their visa status? And are we now identifying some perpetual cheaters? So maybe this is a Bob question.
We get a lot of questions about this in acronym speak, ADR, Academic Dishonesty Report. And if you go to the Ombuds website and click on the academic integrity link, I've put up a whole document now on ADR, what it is, what its fate is, how long it lasts. So a lot of these questions are, the answers are available on the Ombuds website. But just briefly, an academic dishonesty report, you find a kid cheating in your class, you are required to respond in an appropriate way. Sometimes that means you think that the occasion of their cheating is serious enough that it warrants a penalty grade. You have the option to give a penalty grade in your class as a punishment for academic dishonesty. That penalty grade can be a lowering on an assignment, a lowering of the grade on the assignment, anything, or a lowering of the class grade, anything less than they would have earned if you had graded them simply on the basis of their production. If you give a penalty grade, you are obligated to explain that by filing an ADR, an academic dishonesty report. That academic dishonesty report goes into the student's academic electronic file, the ASEF file, and it resides there until the student graduates. And then the fate of that depends. If it's a graduate student that we're talking about, it will reside there in perpetuity. If it's an undergraduate student, it will reside there until they graduate, at which time it will be evaluated by the Associate Provost for Undergraduate Education, Doug Eastry. If there is only one ADR that has accumulated in this student's entire MSU experience, Doug's policy is to delete it upon graduation. So it won't be an everlasting scarlet letter on that file. If there are 2 or more ADRs that the student has accumulated, they persist. That is, they are not deleted upon graduation. If somebody, an employer or a graduate school, were to call and say, we are interested in whether or not this person had academic dishonesty reports against them, if they persist, then our registrar will say, yes, there are reports of that sort here. So we would give that information on a need-to-know basis.
Let me add to that. Okay, a couple of things. Although it's in the student's electronic advising file, it cannot be seen by most people that have access to ESAF. Academic advisors cannot see it. Most department administrators cannot see it. It can only be seen by those at the assistant or associate dean's level. The reason they see it is when you file it, this gives them the opportunity to see if there's been a repeat offense, in which case they can request additional sanctions. If a student is cheating and they come in and they're sorrowful and say, don't file a report, I would encourage you to file a report, because your filing a report is the only way that multiple offenses could be tracked. Student, before we had this system, could have offenses in 3 different colleges and no one ever knew it. And what happens when you file the report on the first offense, the student has to take a free non-credit online course that requires some reading and some reflective essays, and a hold is put on until they're finished with that. If it's a repeat offense or an egregious offense, then it goes up through a judiciary system, and the student also has appeal rights.
So, got another question for the syllabus queen. But several people were curious about whether or not you can make changes to the syllabus after the start of the semester. And I suppose that in a way it sort of is what Tom was talking about in terms of the distinction in my mind between the exam schedule and the content of the syllabus, particularly grading practices. I'll let Bob tell me if you can do it at all, but I would say don't go changing your grading practices after the semester has started, unless, for example, the students point out to you that in your grading scale, there are some numbers missing. Okay, you didn't copy it right out of your Excel spreadsheet or something. I mean, there you're correcting an understandable mistake. You need to fix that. And probably would not substantively change what would be a failing grade or a passing grade. So those kind of things I think have to be fixed and stay the same. On the other hand, like Tom, you might need to move an exam date a little bit because of how the course is unfolding or other sorts of things like that. I actually have a statement in the syllabus that says those kinds of things might happen, and I will give you plenty of notice. The other thing that sometimes changes is I'm really tied to my objectives. My exams are tied to the objectives in the course, and there's something in there that says I might change the objectives during the course. But usually it's because I realized that I've been teaching something and having an expectation and I didn't have the objective. And once again, if I let you know 2 weeks ahead of time that there's something else that's likely to show up on the next exam, I think that that's fair. And I think that it's really a golden rule kind of thing with this sort of change. You want to treat the students as you would want to be treated and just give them due notice, and I think that you'll be fine. I've not gotten into trouble with those kinds of changes.
Can I add? I have heard more than once that the syllabus is a contract. The syllabus is not a contract. Not. It is a communication device that you use to inform your students about important matters of your class. And so unlike contracts which have to be renegotiated once they're signed, this is a sort of detailed letter between you and your class, telling them about your expectations and about what they can expect from the class. I agree with Kathy. If you can avoid changing it, I would. Nothing drives students up a wall faster than changing the syllabus, especially issues of grading and when exams are and et cetera, Have a darn good reason if you have to change it, and then give them plenty of notice. But you can do it, but please do it judiciously and not trivially, and please plan ahead carefully so you don't run into that. But it can be changed. It's not a contract.
If I see a student cheating with a cell phone, am I allowed to confiscate the phone?
Nope.
Did you want to say anything more about that?
I don't know, you steal their shoes instead. No, the point is it's their property. You can't take their backpack, you can't take their trousers. You can't take anything that is a student's. Now, if they're cheating with their cell phone and, you see them, I don't know. If that's your only evidence, you perhaps could ask them, to show you their cell phone or something, but you can't take it, you can't abscond with it any more than you could their shoes. Yes.
Go ahead.
Are you allowed to take a photo of a student looking at their cell phone or looking at paper or something like that as evidence?
I don't see why not. Yes.
So just to be sure that the question got recorded, are you allowed to take a photo of a student, presumably looking at their phone or some other source? And
Yeah.
Bob says yes.
So may you tell them that, kind of go up there and say, cell phones aren't allowed to be used during the class right now. Could you please turn your phone off and set it up here where I can see it? Am I violating their personal space?
No, I think that's perfectly reasonable. You can make rules about cell phone use or non-use, more likely, and you could certainly say, place it on the top of your desk face down, or any number of those things. I've even heard of some people who actually have them place it up on a central desk at the front of the room during a class, but you can't steal it.
And I would say if I were going to be in the practice of taking photos of students who I thought were cheating during an exam, you know what I'd do about that? Put it in the syllabus.
I would, personally, I avoid anything that can appear as disruptive or singling a person out. So I wouldn't take the picture. I would note who's on either side, and I would look at those exams and see if I can see any evidence. I may just deal with the fact that I saw you doing this. I had one case where Wei Yi appeared to be copying from Ollie. These are my two friends here. And I didn't say anything, I didn't point, I just stared for a while, which no one, until they saw me. And they saw me and kept going. And were subsequently written up. But I would personally not do anything that really draws attention to the situation.
Go ahead.
So I have specifically in my syllabus, cell phones aren't allowed. However, I have exams that require calculations. And I've had students say that their phone is their calculator. Are we allowed to say that they must purchase a regular calculator?
Yes.
And require that?
Can you require students to have a calculator rather than using their cell phone? And the answer is yes. Of course, it would need to be in that list of stuff that students will have to have with the textbooks and that sort of thing. And in my department, we just decided we would buy calculators.
I've been trying to convince our department to do that.
you know, you can get a pretty decent calculator, as long as it doesn't have to be too fancy, you know, for less than $10. So, this is for Bob.
Watch out for the Apple Watch.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Good point.
That's the next one.
Yeah. Can faculty/instructors file grievances about students?
Yes. I don't know, what is the issue? About what? Do you feel aggrieved by a student? I mean, it can go both ways. Faculty can file about students. Actually, faculty filing about students is not called a grievance, it's called a complaint. But the answer is yes, both ways. But if there's more to that question than you want to share, call me.
Disruptive class behavior, inappropriate language on a returned homework or exam.
Those are two issues that we have had faculty complaints against students.
And what's the process of filing?
Well, it depends on what the nature of the issue is. If it's a behavioral thing, there is a student judiciary, and you just contact the folks over in Student Affairs. They'll tell you how to do that. There is that whole document that Tom put up on his slide, Student Rights and Responsibilities, that has 2 articles about how to file complaints against students.
I think the easy process answer to that question is call Bob Caldwell.
Call me and I'll be happy to work through it with you.
I've been in situations where I wanted to have students in different locations before the start of exams for better seating assignments and received responses like, "You cannot make me do that." So is it acceptable to have alternate exam locations and expect students to do that?
Alternate seating, or what?
It said locations.
Seating?
Like in the room, just in the room?
I know it's been done. I know it's been done.
Are you kidding? Once upon a time, when I was really concerned about this, I assigned seats. Because I was concerned about what Tom was saying and being able to identify who was on either side of someone if I was concerned about their cheating. So I did assign seats in a classroom.
I do that too, but when you receive a response from...
You stand there and you say, "Yes, I can."
So, you know, you have students that, you know, and it affects the climate in the room too. You can't make me do that.
Yeah.
So what's the appropriate response?
At that moment in time, I would probably say to them, "You are going to sit in the assigned seat for the exam, and we can talk about it afterwards."
And you have a right to go see the ombudsman and complain. You're going to take the exam now, and there are procedures where you can protest.
Sure.
You can always send any of your students to see me at any time for any reason.
You might put it in the syllabus.
You can put it in the syllabus that I'm available.
No, but I mean, I'm not being facetious. If you tell students ahead of time what to expect in the exam, then they deal with it generally.
Many people do 2 or more versions of the exam, green exam and a white exam. I once had a student that had the answers to the green exam on the white exam.
You know, we're down to about 5 minutes left, and I had a couple of other notes that I wanted to mention if they did not get elicited. What I would like to do is, because we didn't get to all the questions, could we create some answers to the ones we didn't get to, and it could get posted along with the video? Okay, so we will get some answers to you for those other questions. When I was invited to participate in this, and we were talking about ways to avoid grievances, I felt as if, in a way, there's a bit of a negative connotation there, and I really prefer to think about just being very fair with students and upfront, And that those two things go a long way toward creating the circumstances that will prevent grievances. It won't prevent complaints, and it won't prevent requests that you sit back and say, you have got to be kidding me, I cannot believe that you asked me that, okay? But just as I said earlier, sort of treating students as you would like to be treated in a similar circumstance will go a long way. I think that fairness in decision-making is a regular challenge because we can't anticipate all of the sorts of circumstances that are going to arise. And despite, or maybe because my syllabus has gotten as long as it has because I've been teaching a long time, and a lot of things have come up, and now I'm trying to be proactive about them. And some people would say, well, don't even try. But there have been occasions where a student had a request, I will say, and you know what? I did not want to grant it. I really didn't. But I could not, within the parameters of my syllabus, find a way that I could legitimately say no. And because if I did, I was sure they were going to make a complaint that could go to a grievance. And then I would sit there and say, do I think that a group of faculty and students would look at this and side with the students? And I would say, yep, I think they would. In which case, I begrudgingly agreed to what the student was requested or negotiated something, still just, was in my craw, was not happy about it. But that's that semester. You can change it the next time around. So I think digging in your heels sometimes, you just have to think about whether or not this is the fight to fight at this time. It might be, but other times, maybe not. It's my 28-page syllabus. It was someone else who was trying to shorten a 5-page syllabus, and that would be great.
Would that also be released with materials?
My 28-page syllabus? Well, if you want to see it, I'll give it to you. And I have to say, it got longer after I went and did a literature search on syllabi, which there's not a lot of research to guide syllabus development, but there were some things in there that I thought, oh, that's good, I'm going to put that in there. It's only going to add another half a page or so.
Our FOD office, by the way,
yes,
has a lovely syllabus checklist that you can check with suggested language about various things. You don't have to put it all in, but if you say, oh, I want something about that, there's language there. And there's suggestions for things that should go on your syllabus on the Ombuds website too. And of course, the Code of Teaching Responsibilities, the very minimum you have to do, there are 6 items listed on item number 1 that have to be in every syllabus. So there are resources beyond Kathy Doig's.
What was the first site you mentioned?
The
FOD. Faculty
and Organizational Development. One more thing from me, and then we'll let Casey have the last one.
Well, I was going to add to that. In addition to that, with the FOD checklist, there's a website called webaccess.msu.edu, and it's about how to make our materials accessible for posting online. So if you post your syllabus or anything to D2L, it's supposed to be made accessible for visually impaired students. They actually have a template that's already made that meets all of the FOD requirements on it. And you can kind of pick and choose what parts you want to keep. So if you're starting from scratch and want to look at a new syllabus, I would recommend going to the webaccess.msu.edu site.
So just 2 last things. I would say don't keep secrets about your grading. Tom talked about this briefly, but I think grading in the end is like making sausage. There's a lot that goes into it, right? And if you are going to boost student grades, you better be doing it. I mean, if you're not going to hold hard and fast to what you have published in the syllabus, and you're going to boost some student grades and not others, you better have some rationale for that. So you'll see in my 28-page syllabus, I have a boost criteria. If you're within 1% of the cut, there's a chance that your grade could get boosted, and here's what you need to do to make that happen, okay? Because I just think that that could be really dangerous territory. And one last thing, and that is that this is a human interaction, right, with students, and they come and they ask things of us, or they do things that just drive us nuts and make us angry too. And I think that you have to sit back, take a deep breath, and remember to be the adult in this discussion. And, you know, I feel as if I've gotten really pretty good at being able to say to a student empathetically when I'm going to say no to them. I know this disappoints you, and I'm sorry about that. But I think you understand that in fairness to other students, I will not be able to grant your request. And just that kind of good, interpersonal, respectful sort of reply, I think will go a long way toward easing some of the reasons that they go see Bob. They should go see Bob just because he's a nice guy, okay? And I think that he would enjoy that. So maybe if you take something away from this session, I don't know, maybe we'll see that chart go down, Bob.
Yeah, then I'll start joining you guys on the retirement line.
Okay, all right. So thank you all for coming. We'll get these other answers to you, and if you have other questions that are pressing, I'm sure that any of us would stay and talk about it.
Before you all go, just a couple of quick housekeeping items. If you could, please, we would certainly welcome your feedback on the evaluation form. You can either leave it on the chair or out on the table there for us. Help yourself to any last remaining food. And one last thing, please join me in thanking Tom, Kathy, and Bob for the